Story 1. The Night Caller Outline. 1. The Empty Streets. It was well after midnight when Daniel buttoned up his red jacket and left the diner where he worked to late hours. The streets were deserted, litter dancing occasionally in the cold wind as if something unseen shifted it on purpose. Lamps flickered above cracked pavement, each yellow glow bordered by oppressive shadows. He wasn't new to walking home this way. He'd done it countless times, but tonight the silence carried a density that felt unnatural, almost alive. Every footstep echoed like a hollow warning, bouncing across the abandoned rows of houses. Halfway down the block, his phone buzzed, a vibration so abrupt in that heavy silence that it made him flinch. He reached for it, squinting at the glowing screen. A text from an unknown number. "Stop walking." "I see you," his throat tightened. He looked around quickly. Nothing but dead houses and blurred street signs. Dark windows reflected dim light, but no movement. It could be a joke, he told himself. Maybe a friend pulling a prank. Still, he slipped the phone back into his pocket, lengthened his stride, and tried to ignore the goosebumps spreading over his skin. Another buzz. He froze before checking. The message read, "Don't turn around." His chest clenched. Suddenly, even his own breathing felt too loud. Against instinct, he lowered his gaze, resisting the urge to look back. But the sensation was undeniable, eyes boring into his spine. His heart hammered against his ribs, every nerve screaming that something was lurking only steps behind. He tightened his grip on his jacket zipper and forced himself forward, each stride heavier than the last, as though the street itself wanted to hold him there. The night pressed closer, waiting for the moment he broke the rule. Outline 2. Footsteps behind him. Then came the sound he dreaded most. Footsteps shredding the fragile silence behind him. Too distinct, too real to explain away. The rhythm was wrong. A half-beat after his own steps, perfectly synchronized but delayed, like a predator savoring distance. His pulse roared in his ears. He tried to convince himself someone else was just out late. But when he quickened his pace, the phantom rhythm kept up. When he slowed, they did too. It was no coincidence. The wind picked up, carrying a faint metallic tang, sharp like rust. Daniel avoided looking back, knowing if he obeyed the earlier warning, maybe, just maybe, this nightmare would dissolve. But his nerves rebelled. With the corner of his eye, he glimpsed motion. Something darting behind a telephone pole barely wide enough to cover a person. A shadow where none should be. His phone buzzed again. Fingers shaking, he raised it. "Nice jacket. Red suits you." Daniel's vision narrowed. That jacket had been folded away for months in his closet, untouched until tonight. Whoever sent the text wasn't describing him from memory. They were looking right at him now. A cold line of sweat slid down his spine. He spun suddenly, driven by terror and defiance. The street stared back completely empty. Hollow houses, dead lights, no figure by the pole. Nevertheless, at the exact instant he turned, the footsteps ceased as well, vanishing into a silence so deep it collapsed around him. The sudden stillness was worse than noise, for it carried intent, as if the unseen presence smiled at his panic. Daniel stood frozen, feeling those unseen eyes still resting heavy on him. Unseen, but closer than ever. Outline 3. The window. Across the street, desperate to end the nightmare, Daniel crossed toward the larger avenue he knew would hold traffic and neon. They were only 3 blocks ahead. Hope glimmered until he passed house number 1324. The warped iron numbers on its weathered wall gleamed faintly in the flickering streetlight. Something about this house stopped him like a rope around his chest. Through the rotting boards nailed across the upstairs window, faint amber light seeped. Inside the glow, framed by splintered wood, a silhouette stood perfectly still. It did not twitch, did not shift. Its head was tilted slightly, giving the impression of amused curiosity. Daniel blinked hard, praying to dissolve the image. When his eyes cleared, the figure ducked suddenly, jerking out of sight as if caught in the act. Another vibration rattled his hand. He almost dropped the phone. The new text read, "House 1324, upstairs window, how?" His teeth chattered, though he wasn't cold. That was exactly where the figure had been, and exactly where his feet were planted. Slow creaking drifted from above, boards straining against nails. Wood groaned under the weight of movement. His breathing punched faster as fear clawed into his throat. Then came a deliberate bang against the wall above, loud and heavy, as if something inside wanted out right over his head. The sound shook dust loose from the cracked plaster. Daniel staggered back into the middle of the street, staring at the upper window now buried in shadow. He had two choices: run for his life, or admit the caller knew every step he'd take. Outline 4. A face in the glass panic hollowed him out as he stumbled ahead, chasing the promise of bright lights. Every street lamp now buzzed with sinister electricity, throwing warped halos on cracked asphalt. But something gnawed at the edge of his mind, the feeling he was still being herded like prey. Against his better judgment, he risked one last glance back at the cursed house. Upstairs, pressed close to the filth-caked glass, a face now stared directly at him. Not a mask, not a shadow, the pale outline of a human face distorted with unnatural glee. Its mouth stretched into a vast grin that bent the skin around its cheeks until it looked painful, almost tearing. Eyes pale, too pale, they glowed faintly in the lamplight like hollow marbles. Daniel's body locked. He couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. Then the phone vibrated again. This time the message broke him. "Smile back, Daniel." Daniel's stomach lurched. They knew his name. He had never responded, never given a chance to reveal it. Whoever or whatever this was, it knew him intimately enough to strip away denial. His lips trembled, frozen between screaming and crying. The figure in the window raised its hand slowly, pressing a long palm against the glass in silent invitation. Then, with bone-shaking force, a slam shook the front door downstairs. Not soft, not hesitant, a violent pound that rattled the house from foundation to roof. Daniel's survival instinct flared. He spun and sprinted, shoes scraping desperately on pavement. He didn't dare look back again, because something told him the figure may not remain in the window for long. Outline 5. The last message, bursting out onto the main avenue at last. Daniel fought to steady his lungs. The familiar hum of late-night cars soothed him. Headlights washed him in proof that other lives still existed, separate from the nightmare he'd stumbled into. For a moment, hope dared to return. A taxi caught sight of his waving hand and slowed beside him. Without hesitation, he leapt inside, gasping out his address with shaky urgency. Relief washed through him as the cab pulled forward, city lights flickering across his pale face. The noise of the engine and the warmth of the seat cocooned him against the memory of the silence he'd escaped. But the phone would not leave him. A dull glow pulsed against his thigh. With trembling fingers he unlocked it as the cab streaked through neon-lit streets. The message sat there like a fresh wound. "Next time, don't run. I like when you're close." His chest hollowed into panic again. He couldn't swallow, couldn't breathe. Someone had written those words in the present tense. They weren't finished. Drawn by dread, he glanced into the mirror hanging from the cab's windshield. Far behind, in the empty intersection where the taxi had picked him up, stood a single figure under a street lamp, perfectly still, watching. The cab picked up speed, but distance didn't soothe him. That image burned into his eyes. A stranger, maybe human, maybe not, patiently waiting for their next encounter. Phone in hand, smile unseen. Daniel sank into the back seat, unable to tell himself this was just paranoia anymore, because paranoia doesn't know your name, your jacket, or the color of your fear. No, this was real. And he realized with bone-deep certainty, some eyes never blink, and some watchers never stop. Story 2, the locked room outline. 1. The cheap apartment. When Monica signed the lease for her first apartment, she nearly laughed at how cheap the rent was. The building itself was a red brick relic, its hallways narrow, ceilings low, and the smell of damp plaster clinging to every corridor. The landlord, an elderly man with a permanent tremor in his hand, made only one comment as she accepted the keys. "Do yourself a favor, miss. Don't touch the closet in the corner. It's locked for a reason." At first, she took it as some eccentric old man's superstition. Maybe it was used for utilities, or maybe he didn't want her snooping around his storage. When she stepped inside the one-room unit, the closet instantly drew her eyes. The paint around its edges was splintered and scratched, more on the inside than the out, like fingernails digging against wood. No handle, just a dull, rusted lock. She shoved her suitcase in the opposite corner, determined not to feed her own unease. Once the small lamp bathed the room in a weak glow, she tried to relax. But as midnight passed, sipping cheap tea and scrolling her phone, she heard it. A faint tap, like a nail against metal. She stared at the closet door without breathing. 10 seconds later, another tap. Then silence. Monica whispered to herself, "Pipes, just pipes." Ordinary buildings made ordinary noises, right? But the silence after each tap seemed purposeful, like something in that room was listening, waiting for her reaction. She buried herself under the blanket on her futon, forcing her eyes to close. Just as sleep began to rise, another sound brushed her ears, thin and jagged. A whisper. Not words, not yet, but breath pressing against the wood. The closet wanted attention, and she had no choice but to hear it. Outline 2. Something is awake. The next morning, sunlight did little to erase the unease. Monica paced in front of the closet, daring herself to touch the edges. When she pressed her palm against the peeling paint, it felt unnervingly cold, far colder than the rest of the room. She snatched back her hand. At work, she tried to distract herself. Customers rambled, machines whirred, chatter filled the cafe. Normal life swallowed her doubts. But walking home, the dread returned heavy and dark, pressing with each step toward that apartment. Unlocking the door, she immediately noticed something wrong. The closet looked shifted. Nothing drastic, just ever so slightly ajar. The lock stretched as if forced from inside, though still clasped shut. Splinters littered the floorboards below it, fresh, sharp white. She whispered, "Nope," trying to laugh at herself, but her stomach curdled with fear. She cooked some noodles, pretending all was well, when soft rattling stole her attention. The lock quivered, the metal handle twisting left, then right. She dropped her fork, staring in paralyzed disbelief. Slowly the sound stopped. Silence again, deliberate silence. Her phone sat nearby. She almost called the landlord, but then her heart iced over. A voice spoke, very faint, muffled, coming from the closet. It called out just one word in a tone so fragile, it made her knees buckle. That word was hello. The worst part wasn't hearing it. The worst part was recognizing the voice. It wasn't a stranger's, it was hers. That was Monica's own voice, speaking out from behind the closet door. The syllables dragged with a mocking sweetness, mimicking her tone exactly. Every hair on her body rose. She didn't approach, didn't respond. She sat frozen at the kitchen table, unable to eat another bite as her own voice whispered through the dark again. "Hello, outline 3, nights without rest, sleep, abandoned Monica." Whenever she drifted, a noise startled her awake. Scraping, sighing, muffled laughter, always emerging from the locked closet. On the third night, she resorted to shoving towels under the gap beneath the frame, blasting music through small speakers, anything to drown out the vile familiarity of her stolen voice. For a moment, it worked. Too well. The next morning, she blinked awake to a wrong stillness. No faint rattle, no whispers, just suffocating quiet. With tentative courage, she turned toward the closet. A scream stuck in her throat. The towels she had jammed under the door were no longer there. Instead, they were stacked neatly on her nightstand beside her pillow, folded, arranged like some guest in her home had left them as a present. That day, she stormed down to the landlord's cramped office. His eyes shook when he heard her words. "It's awake then," he muttered half to himself. He tried to recover, forcing a cough, shaking his head as if he hadn't said anything odd. "Just keep it locked. That's all you can do." His words weren't comforting. They confirmed she wasn't imagining a thing. Something else was inside that room. Locked in maybe, but aware. Awake. That evening, Monica barricaded the door with a chair pressed firmly against it. She painted on a calm face and attempted to eat, but every chew felt watched. Hours later, she turned off her lamp. At 2 in the morning, groggy with exhaustion, she rolled over and opened her eyes. The closet door was still shut. But the chair, it was no longer braced against the lock. It was quietly resting, harmless by her closet side, as though it had been moved gently from inside. Outline 4. The breach on. The fourth night, after 3 days without real sleep, her body gave in. She collapsed sometime past midnight, sprawled across her futon, exhaustion forcing her to slumber. But silence woke her again. Not the safety of silence, but a silence too deep, like all familiar sounds had been swallowed whole. Cold air painted her skin. Something smelled wrong, rust and wet wood mixed with something animal. She sat up sharply and felt her veins freeze. The closet door stood wide open, not broken, just standing ajar too naturally, as though whatever was inside had simply walked out. Her phone flashlight trembled in her hand. She pointed it into the dark gap. The beam seemed thickened there, swallowed, bent strangely sideways. There was breathing inside, close but invisible, heavy, wet. But her light revealed no shape, only an unnatural blur, as if the air itself rejected being seen. From that darkness came a dragging sound. A limb pulled across wood. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, pressing into her apartment floor. Monica's rational mind shattered, body screaming at her to flee. Heart pounding like a drum, she backed against the far wall. The front door was just 10 steps away, but crossing that open gulf meant going right past the thing that was now stepping closer, each pace accompanied by a hiss of labored breath. She tore herself from the corner, yanked the main door with shaking hands, and stumbled into the stairwell. That's when she froze. Halfway down the stairs stood a figure in the buzzing hallway light. It looked just like her. Same hair, same eyes, same posture, but wrong. Its head tilted at an angle bones don't allow. Its arms hung too long, a smile cracked wide, jaw unhinging far too much as if welcoming her back. From the apartment behind her came a scream, her own voice echoing from 2 places at once. Outline 5. Her own reflection. Monica's voice doubled, bouncing inside the narrow stairwell. Both the doppelganger and the presence in the closet screamed identically, mocking her confusion. She clutched the railing, gasping as the warped copy of herself took 1 step upward, then another, grinning wider with unnatural snaps. Its teeth glistened under the hall's flickering light, row upon row like shattered glass. She fled. She didn't think, didn't care what time it was, or that she'd left the door to her apartment wide open. She bolted into the freezing night, her bare feet pounding the sidewalk until blocks of empty streets separated her from that cursed building. Only after her lungs scorched and her throat burned did she collapse against a lamppost, shivering violently. When dawn came, she packed. She didn't bother returning to her unit alone. She hired 2 friends to stand guard while she collected her minimal belongings in frantic silence. The closet door was firmly closed again, chair exactly where she'd placed it before. But her friends swore they heard breathing while they worked. None lingered more than an hour. To this day, that studio remains on rental listings, always labeled as affordable, conveniently available, contract unsigned for months at a time. Former tenants hardly last beyond weeks. Word circulates that the landlord's warning never changes. Don't mess with the closet. Those who stay longer report the same chilling detail. They all describe the whisper late at night, so close, muffled behind wood. And worse, they swear it's always their own voice pressing through the silence, gently calling, "Hello." The locked room still waits, not for someone brave enough to unlock it, but for someone careless enough to listen too long. Story 3, The Vanishing Hitchhiker. With a twist. Outline 1, the road in Fog David was never fond of driving at night, and that evening proved exactly why. Fog smothered the lonely country road like thick wool, suffocating the headlights of his old sedan. The radio crackled with static until he switched it off, leaving only the hum of the engine and the pulse of his nerves for company. A sign he passed earlier had warned, next town 26 miles. That was when he saw her. A woman walking alone along the shoulder, pale dress clinging damply to her frame like she had waded through a river. Her hair, long and dark, hung over her face as she raised her hand, not waving but with her thumb out like a thumbprint frozen halfway through time. David slowed, heart thudding. The instinct to help wrestled with his better judgment. What if she's in danger? What if she needs help? In the end, guilt won. He rolled down his window and called out, "You okay? You want a ride?" She nodded once, no words, and opened the door without hesitation. The smell of wet earth filled the car as she sank into the passenger seat, hands folded, head bowed. He tried conversation. "Where are you headed?" Her voice was faint, almost distorted. "Home." That was all. David cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. He cracked the air vent, but the cabin felt colder the longer she sat there, like she carried the night inside her dress. Eyes drifting, he caught her reflection in the side mirror. Her gaze seemed pale, cloudy, like glass marbles veined with mist. When she glanced at him, every nerve screamed, "She doesn't belong here." Still, he pressed the gas. The road ahead vanished deeper into the fog, and so did his last pocket of comfort. Outline 2. Strange company. The air inside the car felt different now, slowly draining of warmth, suffocating. David rubbed his arms, but gooseflesh prickled across his skin despite the heater's faint hum. He stole quick glances toward the woman. She sat stiff, unmoving, her fingers knotted tightly in her lap. Dirt clung under her nails, crusted as if she'd clawed her way out of the earth itself. He cleared his throat. "Bad night to be walking alone? You live nearby?" She turned only slightly, her voice a trickle of water through pipes. "Take me home." Something in the phrasing turned his gut. Not to my house, not to my street. Just that one request. "Take me home." Sweat lined his temples. Desperately, David focused on the road. But something caught his peripheral vision, her face in the rearview mirror. Heart stuttering, he realized the reflection wasn't aligned with her body sitting beside him. In the glass, she grinned, lips curling wider and wider, until the line of her mouth nearly split her face. Her head tilted unnaturally sideways, vertebrae popping in silence. His breath hitched. He snapped his gaze to the passenger seat. There she was, sitting normally, silent, motionless. He screwed his eyes forward, pulse hammering harder than the engine. The whisper came again, fractured across both cabin and rear view. "Take me home." Forcing calm, he swallowed and choked out, Where's home?" Very slowly, as deliberate as a puppet, her hand rose and extended into the grey blur beyond the windshield. She pointed forward, into the endless fog that showed no signs of clearing. David knew the request was leading him somewhere. But the car felt bound to her finger, and his feet pressed the gas almost against his will. Outline 3. The destination fog swelled thicker, almost liquid, devouring the landscape. The needle on his fuel gauge edged lower than it had in months, but no signs of a town appeared. No gas stations, no homes, nothing but blurred road stretching forever. Then, like a mirage solidifying, stone pillars loomed from the white haze. A great iron gate arched between them, cracked and broken, yet impossibly standing. His headlights caught the sign, hammered crooked across the bars, rust so heavy the letters could barely be made out. But David didn't need clarity. His gut clamped down as he recognized the shape of crosses sprawling beyond. A cemetery. The woman finally turned fully, her milky eyes glowing faintly in the dull light. "Here," she whispered. David slammed the brake, car lurching at the open gate. You live here?" he stammered, searching her face for a glitch of humanity, some trace of sanity. She smiled faintly. "We all do." His blood went cold. Panic swallowed every logical excuse. He blinked down, her seatbelt still fastened, imprint denting the seat cushion as if heavy weight still pressed down. But when he twisted his head sideways, she wasn't sitting there anymore. The dress, the damp scent, everything had evaporated. The passenger seat was empty, while his mirror shook with motion. In the glass blur of the rear view, however, she still sat smiling wide. Before blind terror drove his foot to hit the gas, the radio switched on by itself, static drowning the silence. Through the sputter, sharp words formed like a chant. "Welcome home. Welcome home, welcome home." And outside his windshield, the cemetery gate yawned open. Ready. Expectant. Outline 4. The passenger revealed. The car door suddenly slammed without warning, the force rattling the entire frame. David whipped left. Yes, the door was shut. But in his headlights, beyond cracked gravestones, she stood among the graves. Dress fluttering in unnatural wind, her head tilted back as though sniffing something on the air. This couldn't be real. He blinked, rubbed his strained eyes, hoping exhaustion painted hallucinations. But her arm extended, pointing toward a tilted headstone crooked with ivy. Drawn by an unholy compulsion, he stumbled out, crunching gravel under trembling shoes. Each step toward the grave felt heavier, like an invisible leash tightened around his chest. His flashlight beam caught the stone. He froze solid. His own name was etched deep into the granite, worn by rain but unmistakable. His birth date, and beneath the carved death date, tonight. Air left his lungs in a sharp whimper. Behind him, a voice twisted close, whispering almost kindly, "We needed a driver." "Thank you." Before he could flee, fog coiled around him like ropes, tugging him back toward that headstone. His own reflection seemed trapped inside the marble, eyes wide with the exact terror stretching across his face. The soil beneath the grave shifted softly, like something beneath the earth stirred, recognizing the arrival of what belonged inside. David screamed, staggering backward. Yet the woman was already inches from him now. Her eyes had swallowed the whites entirely, black pupils expanding until no light remained. She opened her mouth wide, so wide, and exhaled a gust of mist that seeped into his lungs like drowning. Outline 5. The hitchhiker's return at dawn. Passers-by discovered David's sedan idling quietly on a roadside curve. Driver's side open, key still in the ignition, radio dead. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle. No fingerprints but his own. No passenger. But the seatbelt on the empty passenger side was still locked across, pulled taut, like something heavy had been riding with him the entire night. The police chalked it up to a disappearance. Another lost driver swallowed by the miles of backcountry. No body surfaced. No tracks led from the car, but whispers began. Farmers passing that road swore they saw a woman along the shoulder during fogged nights. A pale figure thumbing for a ride, dress soaking wet as though she had clawed up from a riverbed. Some even admitted, against their sense, picking her up. And those who did described the same suffocating cold, the same whisper requesting, "Take me home." Worse yet, a handful reported glancing into their mirrors and seeing not one figure but two. The woman with her predatory smile, and a young man in the seat behind, face frozen in stretched horror, eyes wide as though begging silently for escape. They didn't ask his name. They didn't need to. His name was already carved in stone. The cemetery waits beyond its broken gates. The legend now moves from driver to driver, car to car. The hitchhiker never vanishes. She simply brings another along. And once you carry her home, you never ride alone again. Fog remains the one warning, curling up at dusk like skeletal fingers. And every whisper reminds travelers what they shouldn't forget. Some passengers don't leave. Some journeys don't end. And sometimes the road doesn't lead you home. It delivers you to theirs.